I can heal your eyes. The words landed softly, almost swallowed by the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beeping of hospital monitors, but somehow they cut through everything. A few heads turned. One nurse paused mid-step. And then, just as quickly, the room exhaled in quiet disbelief. Amara Cole stood near the far wall, a mop still damp in her hands, the faint scent of bleach clinging to her uniform. Her shoes left small wet prints across the polished white floor, each step a reminder of where she belonged in a place like this. Invisible, replaceable, easy to ignore. Across the room, Daniel Whitmore sat perfectly still in a leather chair that looked too expensive for a clinic waiting area, his posture straight, his expression unreadable behind dark, unfocused eyes. A sleek white cane rested against his knee, untouched. Beside him stood Victoria Hale, sharp in a tailored cream suit, her heels clicking softly as she shifted her weight, her hand resting lightly on Daniel's shoulder like she owned not just his attention, but his future. She let out a small laugh, the kind that didn't need volume to carry judgment. That's sweet, she said, not even looking at Amara, as if the words didn't deserve the effort of eye contact. But healing blindness isn't exactly something you pick up between mopping floors. A couple of people nearby chuckled under their breath, not cruelly, just enough to align themselves with the safer side of the room. Amara didn't flinch. Her grip on the mop handle loosened slightly, and she took one step forward, the faint squeak of rubber soles against tile echoing louder than it should have. The overhead lights cast a cold sheen across her skin, catching in her eyes, steady and unshaken. I didn't say I could fix everything, she replied quietly. I said I can heal your eyes. This time, Victoria turned. Slowly, her gaze swept over Amara from head to toe, taking in the faded stitching on her uniform, the slight fray at the cuff, the badge clipped just slightly crooked. Security, Victoria called without raising her voice, her tone smooth, practiced. Can we have someone escort her out? We're in the middle of something important. The word important hung in the air like a boundary line. Amara's eyes flickered, not toward the approaching guard, but toward Daniel. He hadn't spoken, not once, but something in the way his head tilted, just slightly, suggested he was listening, not to the room, but to her. The space between them felt different, quieter, as if the noise couldn't quite reach it. Amara hesitated, just for a second, then reached into the small pocket of her apron and pulled out a folded piece of paper, edges softened from being handled too many times. She stepped closer, just enough to place it on the small side table near Daniel's hand. Her fingers brushed the surface lightly, leaving behind a faint trace of moisture from the cleaning solution. Not all blindness is in the eyes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper now, meant for him and no one else. The guard's hand hovered near her elbow, unsure whether to rush or wait. Victoria exhaled sharply, clearly done with the interruption. But Daniel's hand moved. Slowly, deliberately. His fingers found the edge of the paper, pausing as if testing something unseen. The room seemed to tighten, the air thinning just enough to make every breath noticeable. He traced the fold with his thumb, then stilled, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. For the first time since she had spoken, he turned his face slightly toward where Amara stood. Not directly, not precisely, but close enough to feel intentional. Wait, he said. Just one word. Calm. Quiet. But it stopped everything. The guard froze. Victoria's hand slipped from his shoulder. And in that suspended moment, with the scent of bleach still lingering and the fluorescent lights humming overhead, something invisible shifted, subtle, fragile, but undeniable, as if a truth had entered the room long before anyone was ready to see it. The word lingered in the air like a thread pulled too tight. Wait. It was not loud, but it carried weight, the kind that made people pause before they even understood why. The guard stepped back half an inch, uncertain now, his authority suddenly softer around the edges. Victoria's expression did not change immediately, but the stillness in her shoulders gave her away. Daniel Whitmore rarely interrupted. And when he did, rooms listened. His fingers remained on the folded paper, tracing its edge again, slower this time, as if the texture itself held meaning. The faint scent of cleaning solution mixed with the sterile air, sharp and cold, yet grounding. What did you say your name was? He asked, his voice measured. Directed forward, but not quite landing on her. Amara hesitated, just long enough for the silence to stretch, then answered, Amara. No last name. No explanation. Just that. Victoria let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh, though there was no humor in it. Daniel, she said gently, stepping closer again, her tone shifting into something softer, more controlled. You do not need to entertain this. You have a consultation in 10 minutes. Her hand hovered near his shoulder again, but this time she did not touch him. Not yet. Daniel did not respond to her. Instead, he lifted the paper slightly, the faint rustle sounding louder than expected in the quiet room. You wrote this? He asked. Amara nodded, then realized he could not see it, and spoke instead. Yes. Another pause. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady and indifferent. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled, then faded. Daniel's thumb pressed lightly against the fold, then stopped. What do you mean by it? He asked. The question was simple, but it landed with intention. Amara shifted her weight, the sole of her shoe making a soft sound against the tile. She could feel every eye in the room now, even the ones pretending not to look. I mean, she said carefully, sometimes people lose more than sight. Victoria stepped in then, her patience thinning, her voice still polished, but tighter now. This is inappropriate, she said, glancing briefly at the guard as if to remind him of his role. She is staff. She should not be engaging with patients like this. The word staff carried distance, a line drawn clean and firm. Amara did not look at her. She kept her focus where Daniel's voice had come from, steady, grounded. Have you ever noticed, Amara continued quietly, that your condition does not behave the way it should? The room shifted again, subtle but real. Victoria's head turned sharply. That is enough, she said, sharper now, the warmth gone. You are not a doctor. You are not even. She stopped herself, but the sentence did not need finishing. Daniel's head tilted slightly, that same small movement from before, but this time it lingered. What do you mean? He repeated, slower now. Victoria stepped forward, placing her hand on his shoulder at last, her touch light but firm, guiding. Daniel, listen to me. You have had the best specialists in the country. We have gone through every test. There is nothing unclear about your diagnosis. Her voice softened again, controlled, reassuring. This is exactly why we keep your environment limited. Too many voices, too many opinions. Amara felt the words land, not as an attack, but as a wall, carefully built, carefully maintained. She took a breath, shallow but steady. The smell of bleach was stronger now, or maybe she was just more aware of it. Then why? Amara said, her voice still calm. Does he respond to light? Silence. It was not immediate. It unfolded, 1 second at a time, stretching longer than comfort allowed. Victoria's hand tightened slightly on Daniel's shoulder, just enough to notice if you were looking for it. He does not, she said quickly. That is not how his condition works. But Daniel's fingers moved again, this time lifting slightly from the paper, hovering in the air as if searching for something unseen. What do you mean? Respond, he asked. The question was quieter now, less certain, but more real. Amara took a small step forward, closing a distance that was not measured in feet. When you turned your head earlier, she said, you moved toward the light coming from the window. Not away from it. Not randomly. Toward it. Victoria's breath caught, almost imperceptibly. That is coincidence, she said quickly. People adjust their posture all the time. But Daniel was no longer facing forward. His head had shifted again, just slightly, as if testing something, as if listening not with his ears, but with something deeper. The room held its breath, and for the first time, doubt entered not as a statement, but as a possibility that refused to leave. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, like air before a storm, subtle but impossible to ignore. Daniel Whitmore remained still, yet something in the set of his shoulders had changed, a tension replaced by something quieter, something searching. His fingers hovered in front of him, not touching anything now, as if reaching for a shape he could not name. The faint glow from the tall window behind Amara stretched across the polished floor, thin lines of pale afternoon light cutting through the sterile white of the room. Dust particles drifted slowly in that beam, visible only if you knew where to look. Amara watched him, not with urgency, but with a calm that felt almost out of place. You felt it, she said softly. It was not a question. Victoria's heels clicked sharply against the tile as she stepped forward, placing herself slightly between them, her posture composed, but her voice edged now with something harder. "This is enough," she said. "You are creating confusion where there is none. Daniel does not need this." Her hand tightened again on his shoulder, a silent signal, a reminder of control. But Daniel did not lean into it. Instead, his head turned slightly, just a fraction, as if aligning himself with something he could almost detect. "Where is the window?" he asked. The question was simple, but it landed like a weight. Victoria hesitated. "Just for a second." "To your left," she answered, quickly, smoothly. "About 8 feet away." Daniel nodded faintly, then shifted his face again, slower this time, testing, searching. The room seemed to narrow around that movement. Amara did not speak immediately. She took one small step to the side, careful, measured, moving out of the beam of light. The change was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not paying attention. But Daniel's brow tightened. Just slightly. His head moved again, following something that had just shifted without sound. The guard near the door frowned, uncertain why he was still standing there. A nurse paused halfway down the hallway, pretending to check her tablet, but not moving on. "You see," Amara said quietly. "Not with your eyes. But something is still there." Victoria's composure cracked, not visibly, but in the space between her words. "He is adjusting to sound," she said quickly. "People compensate. It is natural." But Daniel's breathing had changed. Slower, deeper, more aware. His hand lifted again, this time higher, palm open, as if trying to feel the light itself. "Move again," he said. The words were directed toward Amara, though he did not say her name. Amara hesitated only a second, then stepped back into the light. The shift was immediate, but delicate. Daniel's face turned toward her, not perfectly, not precisely, but closer than chance would allow. A faint crease formed between his brows, as if something long buried was pressing against the surface. Victoria stepped forward quickly now, her voice sharper, controlled but urgent. "Daniel, stop. This is not helpful. You are imagining patterns that are not there." Her hand reached for his arm, guiding, steadying. But this time he pulled away. Not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough to break the contact. The movement was small, but it changed everything. The air in the room felt thinner now, each breath more noticeable, each sound sharper. Amara's voice softened even further, almost blending with the hum of the lights. "Your eyes are not completely gone," she said. "Something is blocking them. Something artificial." The word artificial hung there, quiet but heavy. Victoria's expression stilled completely, her features smoothing into something unreadable. "That is a serious claim," she said, her tone returning to calm, but colder now. "And a dangerous one." Daniel did not respond to her. His focus remained forward, his face angled toward the light that brushed across Amara's shoulder. His fingers curled slightly, as if trying to hold onto the sensation before it slipped away. "Why would that happen?" he asked, more to himself than anyone else. Amara did not answer immediately. The scent of bleach lingered between them, sharp and clean, grounding in a moment that felt anything but. She looked at him, really looked this time, past the suit, past the wealth, past the silence that surrounded him. "Because someone needed you not to see," she said. And this time, the silence that followed was not confusion. It was recognition beginning to form. The words did not echo, but they settled into the room like something heavy placed carefully on glass. "Because someone needed you not to see." No one moved right away. Even the distant hallway noise seemed to fade, as if the building itself had paused to listen. Daniel Whitmore remained still, but his breathing had shifted again, deeper now, more deliberate, like someone standing at the edge of a realization they were not ready to name. His hand slowly lowered from the air, fingers brushing lightly against the arm of the chair as if grounding himself in something solid. Victoria did not react immediately. That was what made it noticeable. Her posture remained perfect, shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, flickered just once toward Amara before returning to Daniel. "That is an accusation," she said, her voice calm, controlled, but colder than before. "And you have no evidence to support it." Amara did not answer right away. She shifted her weight slightly, the faint squeak of her shoe against the tile, breaking the stillness in a small, almost fragile way. The smell of disinfectant lingered, sharp in the back of her throat, grounding her in a space that suddenly felt too tight. I did not say who, Amara replied quietly. I said why. Daniel's head tilted again, slower this time, as if the distinction mattered. His brow tightened slightly, a faint crease forming as his thoughts moved somewhere deeper, somewhere less certain. What would block it? He asked, his voice softer now, less directed outward and more inward, like a question he had been asking himself without knowing it. Victoria stepped forward quickly, her heels clicking once, twice, precise and controlled. Daniel, you are tired, she said, her tone shifting again, softer, persuasive, practiced. You have been through months of treatment, consultations, disappointment. It is natural to look for answers where there are none. Her hand reached for his again, resting gently on his forearm this time, guiding, steadying. We should go. Your specialist is waiting. For a moment, it looked like he might follow. His shoulders eased slightly, his posture leaning just enough to suggest compliance. But then his fingers tightened against the chair, just slightly, enough to stop the movement. The hesitation was small, almost invisible, but it held. Amara watched it happen. The shift, the resistance, quiet but real. Certain medications, she said carefully, her voice low, measured, can interfere with the way the eye communicates with the brain. Not damage, just interference. Like a signal being redirected. Victoria's hand stilled. Not pulled away. Not tightened. Just still. Daniel's head turned again, more directly now, closer than before, as if the space between them had narrowed. You were saying I am not actually blind, he said. The words were not hopeful. They were cautious, almost guarded, like something too fragile to hold too tightly. Amara did not rush her answer. The fluorescent lights hummed above, steady and indifferent. Somewhere nearby, a machine beeped once, then fell silent again. I am saying, she replied slowly, your eyes may still be trying. The sentence hung there, unfinished in a way that made it feel more complete. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, the faintest shift, but enough to show something had landed. His hand lifted again, not reaching this time, but resting just above his knee, fingers slightly spread, as if remembering the shape of something lost. Victoria exhaled softly, controlled, measured. This is exactly the kind of false hope we have worked so hard to avoid, she said, her tone calm, but firmer now. You cannot let someone with no medical training fill your head with speculation. It is irresponsible. Amara's gaze did not waver. Then test it, she said simply. Victoria's eyes snapped toward her. That is not your place, she said, sharper now. But Daniel did not respond to Victoria. He was already turning his face again, slowly, deliberately, toward where the light still filtered through the window, brushing faintly across the floor. This time, the movement was not hesitant. It was searching, intentional. How, he asked. One word. Quiet. But open. Amara took a small step forward, careful, measured, stopping just at the edge of the light. The warmth from the sun contrasted faintly with the cold air of the room, a subtle shift you could only feel if you paid attention. Stand up, she said gently. Victoria's voice cut in immediately. No, that is not necessary. But Daniel was already moving. Slowly, deliberately, his hand pressing against the arm of the chair as he rose. The motion was steady, controlled, practiced. His cane remained where it was, untouched. The room seemed to hold its breath again, every small sound amplified in the quiet. Amara stepped back half a foot, just enough to create space, just enough to let the light fall differently. Now, she said softly, tell me where you feel it. Daniel stood still, his face angled slightly upward, his eyes unfocused but searching. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his brow tightened, just slightly, and his head turned, not randomly, not uncertainly, but toward the light that touched her shoulder. And this time, no one in the room could call it coincidence. No one spoke, not immediately, because what had just happened did not need explanation, it needed time to settle. Daniel Whitmore stood there, unmoving, his face turned toward the light that rested across Amara's shoulder, his expression no longer neutral, no longer distant, but focused in a way that had not been there before. It was not sight, not fully, but it was direction, it was awareness, and it was undeniable. The faint warmth from the window traced along his cheek, subtle but present, and his breathing slowed as if he were listening to something only he could feel. "There," he said quietly. The word came out almost like a realization rather than a statement. His fingers lifted slightly again, hovering in front of him, then turning just a fraction, following the shift of light as Amara moved half an inch to the side. It was small, almost imperceptible, but his head followed. Not perfectly, not sharply, but enough. Enough that the room could not pretend anymore. Victoria did not move at first. Her posture remained composed, but the stillness had changed. It was no longer control. It was calculation. Her gaze fixed on Daniel, watching every movement, every breath, every subtle shift that threatened the narrative she had maintained for months. "You are reacting to heat," she said, her voice smooth, immediate, controlled. "Sunlight carries warmth. That is all this is." But her words did not land the same way anymore. They did not settle. They hovered, thin and fragile against what everyone had just witnessed. Daniel did not respond to her. His attention remained forward, his face angled toward the light, his brow slightly furrowed, as if trying to hold onto the sensation before it disappeared. "No," he said after a moment, quieter now, more certain. "It moves." The sentence was simple, but it cut clean through the room. Victoria's jaw tightened, just slightly, the only sign of strain beneath her polished exterior. "Daniel," she said, stepping closer, her tone softening again, almost pleading now, "please. You are letting this go too far. We have specialists for this. Real doctors." "Not." She stopped herself again, but the implication lingered in the space between them. Amara did not react to the unfinished sentence. She remained where she was, steady, grounded, the faint scent of bleach still clinging to her clothes, a quiet contrast to the tension building around her. "Ask yourself," she said gently, "why no one tested that?" Daniel's fingers stilled. The question did not come with force, but it did not need to. It slipped in quietly, settling somewhere deeper than logic. His jaw tightened again, more noticeably this time, and his head tilted just slightly, as if the thought itself had weight. "They did," Victoria answered quickly, her voice firm now, almost too firm. "Every possible test. You know that." But Daniel did not turn toward her. Not this time. Instead, he took a slow breath, the kind that fills the chest and lingers for a moment before leaving. His hand lowered gradually, resting against his side, but his face remained lifted, angled toward the light, as if he was unwilling to let it go. "Then why did no one ask me what I felt?" he said. The room stilled again, not with tension this time, but with something quieter, something closer to truth. Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. The answer did not come as easily now. The guard near the door shifted his weight, unsure if he was still needed. A nurse glanced up from her tablet, then quickly looked away, as if she had seen something she was not supposed to witness. Amara took a small step back, not retreating, just creating space, letting the moment belong to him. "Because feeling is not measurable," she said softly, "but it is real." Daniel's shoulders eased slightly, not in relief, but in recognition, like something inside him had finally aligned with something outside. He turned his head again, slower this time, following the light as it stretched across the floor, then shifted as a cloud passed briefly over the sun. For a second, the brightness dimmed, and his brow tightened again. Then the light returned, soft but clear, and his expression changed. It was not dramatic. It was not sudden. It was small, subtle, but it was there. "It changed," he said, almost to himself. Victoria stepped forward again, this time more urgently, her composure beginning to fracture at the edges. "This is enough," she said. "We are leaving." But Daniel did not move. He remained where he was, standing in the quiet, in the light, in the space where doubt had just turned into something far more dangerous. Not for him, but for everything built around him. Daniel did not take the step Victoria expected. The word leaving still lingered in the air, but it no longer held the same authority it had just moments ago. Instead, he stood rooted in place, his body aligned not with her voice, but with the faint, shifting light that stretched across the floor and touched the edge of his shoes. His breathing remained slow, deliberate, as if each inhale was helping him confirm something that could no longer be dismissed. The room felt different now, not louder, not more chaotic, but more aware. Every small movement carried weight. Every silence meant something. Victoria lowered her hand slowly, the one. that had been reaching for him, her fingers curling slightly, as if grasping for control that was slipping just out of reach. "Daniel," she said again, softer this time, her voice carefully measured. "This is not the place for this kind of experiment." The word experiment sounded controlled, but it landed unevenly, as if it did not fully belong. Daniel's head tilted slightly, but not toward her. Toward the window again. Toward the light. "Then where is the place?" he asked quietly. The question did not come with frustration. It came with clarity, and that made it harder to answer. Victoria hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Amara noticed it. Daniel felt it. Even the guard near the door shifted his stance again, as if the balance of the room had subtly changed. "With your specialists," Victoria replied, regaining her tone, her composure returning like a practiced mask. "With people who understand your condition." Amara's gaze lowered briefly, not in submission, but in thought, her fingers brushing lightly against the damp cloth still hanging from her hand. The scent of bleach rose again, sharp and grounding, reminding her of where she stood, of what she was risking just by speaking. Then she looked up again, steady. "Then ask them one question," she said. Daniel did not move, but his attention shifted, focused fully now. "What question?" he asked. Amara took a small breath. "Ask them why your response to light was never recorded." The sentence was simple, but it did not need anything more. It slipped into the room and stayed there. Victoria's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly, but enough to break the illusion of ease. "Because it does not exist," she said quickly, her tone firm, decisive. "You are reacting to suggestion. That is all." Daniel's jaw flexed slightly. Suggestion. The word seemed to linger in his mind longer than the others. His fingers lifted again, slowly, hovering at chest height, then turning slightly, testing, searching. Amara took one careful step to the side. The light shifted again. And again, his head followed. This time, no hesitation, no doubt. The movement was small, but it was consistent, predictable, real. The room did not react with sound. It reacted with stillness. The kind that comes when everyone realizes something. Her control returning in layers, her posture straightening, her voice smoothing. "Enough," she said. "We are done here." But Daniel did not turn toward her. He did not reach for his cane. He did not ask for guidance. Instead, he took one small step forward. The movement was careful, measured, but independent. His shoe crossed into the edge of the light, and he paused there, as if confirming it again, feeling it not just on his face, but around him, within the space itself. "It is not gone," he said quietly. The sentence was not directed at anyone. It was a realization spoken aloud. Amara watched him, her expression calm, but her chest rising slightly faster now, the weight of the moment settling in. She had seen this before, in smaller ways, quieter moments, but never like this. Never with stakes this high. Victoria stepped forward again, faster this time, her composure tightening. "Daniel, listen to me," she said, her voice firmer, almost urgent now. "You are letting this turn into something it is not. You are tired. You need rest." Her hand reached for his arm again, but before she could make contact, he stepped forward once more. Another small step, enough to shift out of her reach. The movement was not forceful. It was not defiant. It was simply chosen, and that made it more powerful than anything else in the room. The light followed him now, stretching across his chest, soft and pale. His face turned slightly, aligning again, confirming again. "I want to see my records," he said. The words were calm, steady, final. And for the first time, Victoria did not answer immediately. Because this was no longer about what he could not see. It was about what he was beginning to understand. The request did not echo, but it shifted everything in the room with a quiet finality that no one could ignore. "I want to see my records." Daniel Whitmore stood in the light, no longer reaching for it, no longer testing it, but standing within it as if he had crossed something unseen and could not step back again. His posture had changed, not dramatically, not in a way that would draw attention from across the room, but enough that those closest to him could feel it. He was no longer waiting to be guided. He was choosing where to stand. Victoria did not answer right away. Her silence stretched longer than it ever had before, and that alone said more than words. Her hand, which had hovered near his arm, lowered slowly to her side, fingers tightening briefly before relaxing again. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but the smoothness was thinner now, like glass under pressure. Daniel, she said softly, your records are handled through your legal team. You know that. It is not something you need to concern yourself with today. The words were familiar, practiced, shaped by repetition. But they no longer landed the same way. Daniel's head turned slightly, not toward her, but away from her, just enough to mark the distance. I did not ask where they are handled, he replied, his voice even, controlled. I asked to see them. The distinction was small, but it cut clean. Amara remained where she stood, just outside the center of the light now, her hands resting lightly against the mop handle, her grip steady despite the tension that had settled into the room. The scent of bleach still lingered, sharp and clean, grounding her in a moment that felt like it could tilt in any direction. She did not speak. She did not need to. The shift was no longer hers to carry. Victoria stepped forward again, her heels clicking softly, each step measured, deliberate, as if reclaiming ground that had quietly been taken from her. You are overwhelmed, she said, her tone softening again, carefully shaped into concern. This is a lot to process. It is natural to feel uncertain after everything you have been through. She reached for his hand this time, not his arm, her fingers brushing lightly against his. Let us go home. We can talk about this in a calmer environment. For a moment, the room held still, waiting to see if he would accept the touch, the direction, the familiar path. Daniel's hand did not pull away immediately, but it did not close around hers either. It remained still, resting where it was, neutral, uncommitted. Then, slowly, he withdrew it. Not abruptly, not forcefully, just enough to create space. I am calm, he said. The words were simple, but they carried something deeper than tone. They carried decision. Victoria's expressed a different way, not frozen, observing. The guard near the door had stopped shifting. The nurse in the hallway no longer pretended to look at her tablet. Even the distant sounds of the building seemed to recede, as if the moment had narrowed around just the three of them. Amara took a small step back, not retreating, just allowing the space to belong to him fully. Her eyes remained steady, her breathing measured, the weight of what had been said in motion settling deeper with each passing second. Daniel lifted his chin slightly, his face still angled toward the light, but now with something else behind it. Not just awareness. Intention. Who has access to my medical records? He asked. This time, the question was direct. Specific. It did not leave room for soft answers. Victoria did not respond immediately. Her gaze flickered, just once, toward the side table, then back to him. It was a small movement, almost invisible, but it did not go unnoticed. Daniel's brow tightened slightly, the faint crease returning, not from confusion, but from recognition. My legal team, she said finally, her voice steady again, but quieter now. And my office, for coordination purposes. The words were precise, careful, but something in them felt arranged. Daniel nodded faintly, absorbing it, turning it over in his mind. His fingers lifted again, not searching for light this time, but resting near his chest, as if grounding himself in something internal. Then I want a copy sent directly to me, he said. The sentence did not rise in volume. It did not need to. It settled into the room with a weight that could not be redirected. Victoria's lips parted slightly, then closed again. The response did not come as quickly now. And in that hesitation, something unspoken became visible. Not in words, not in actions, but in the space where certainty used to be. Amara watched quietly, her presence still, her role no longer questioned but not fully acknowledged either. She had said what needed to be said. Now, the truth was no longer hidden in shadows. It was standing in the light, waiting to be faced. And Daniel Whitmore, for the first time in a long time, was no longer being led away from it. The air did not move, but something inside it shifted, like a balance quietly tipping past the point of return. Daniel. Whitmore remained standing in the same place, the light still brushing across his face, but now it no longer felt like something he was discovering. It felt like something he was holding on to. His request hung in the space between them, steady and unresolved. I want a copy sent directly to me. Victoria did not answer immediately, and this time the silence was not controlled. It stretched unevenly, fragile at the edges. Her gaze held on him, searching, calculating, adjusting in real time, but something had already changed. The version of him that would have accepted delay, redirection, reassurance without question. That version was no longer standing in front of her. "Of course," she said finally, her voice smooth again, but quieter now, as if the confidence had to be rebuilt before it could be spoken. "If that is what you want, we can arrange it." The words were correct, measured, but they arrived half a beat too late. Daniel did not nod. He did not thank her. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, his hand brushing against the edge of the chair behind him, grounding himself again in something real, something physical. "Not arranged," he said calmly. "Sent." The distinction was small, but it removed delay. It removed control. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly at her side, then relaxed again, her composure layering back over the fracture that had briefly shown. "I will have my office send it this afternoon," she replied. This time, her tone did not rise to meet his. It adjusted beneath it. Amara stood a few feet away, just outside the brightest part of the light now, her presence quiet but anchored. The mop handle rested against her palm, her fingers still, her breathing steady. She did not move forward. She did not interrupt. But she did not disappear either. And that, in a room like this, was its own kind of defiance. Daniel's head turned slightly again, not searching for the light this time, but orienting himself within the space, mapping it in a way he had not done before. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint echo of footsteps down the hall, the soft rustle of fabric as Victoria shifted, all of it seemed to settle differently around him now. "Who prescribed the last adjustment to my medication?" he asked. The question came without warning, but it did not feel sudden. It felt inevitable. Victoria blinked once, the smallest pause, but enough. "Your neurologist?" she answered quickly. "Dr. Hayes. You remember." Daniel did not respond immediately. His brow tightened slightly, not in confusion, but in recall. "I remember the name," he said. "I do not remember the conversation." The room tightened again, not with noise, but with awareness. Victoria stepped forward, her heels clicking once against the tile, her presence reasserting itself, precise and controlled. "That is because I handled it," she said smoothly. "You were not feeling well that day. I spoke with him directly." The explanation was clean, logical, efficient, but something in it felt rehearsed. Daniel's fingers lifted slightly again, resting just in front of him, not searching, not reaching, just present. "Then I would like to speak with him myself," he said. Victoria's expression did not break, but it paused. Just enough. The kind of pause that does not belong in a conversation built on certainty. "We can schedule that," she replied, her tone careful again, measured. "There is no need to rush." Daniel turned his face slightly, not toward her, but toward the light again, as if grounding himself in the one thing that had not shifted, the one thing that had not been explained away. "There is every need," he said quietly. The words did not rise. They settled. And this time, they did not leave space for redirection. Amara's gaze softened slightly, not with relief, but with recognition. The moment she had stepped into was no longer fragile. It had taken root. Around them, the room began to move again, slowly, cautiously, as if unsure whether it was allowed to return to normal. The nurse in the hallway took a step, then another. The guard shifted his stance, glancing briefly toward the door. But the center of the room remained unchanged. Victoria stood very still, her posture still perfect, her voice still composed, but the silence around her was different now. It was no longer authority. It was resistance. And Daniel Whitmore, standing in the light he was never supposed to notice, was no longer asking questions to be reassured. He was asking questions that expected answers. The room did not return to normal. Not really. It only pretended to, like a surface settling while something underneath continued to shift. Daniel Whitmore stood exactly where he had been, but the stillness around him was no longer passive. It was deliberate. The light that fell across his face had softened slightly as a cloud drifted past the window, and for a brief moment, the brightness dimmed. His brow tightened again, just a fraction, and his head adjusted, following the change without hesitation. Then the light returned, faint but steady, and his expression eased, not into comfort, but into confirmation. It was real. It had been real the entire time. Victoria watched him closely now, no longer trying to guide his movements, but studying them, measuring what had already slipped beyond her control. Her posture remained composed, but the silence she carried was heavier now, less certain. "We should not do this here," she said finally, her voice lower, more contained, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "This is not appropriate." The word appropriate felt smaller than it used to. Daniel did not turn toward her. His attention remained forward, aligned with the light, his awareness anchored in something that had nothing to do with her voice. "You said everything was tested," he replied quietly. "Every variable." Victoria nodded immediately. It was. The answer came too quickly, too clean. Daniel's fingers lifted slightly again, not searching, not uncertain, but thoughtful now, as if the movement itself had become part of how he processed the world. "Then why was I never asked to stand in front of a window?" he said. The question did not rise in tone, but it landed harder than any accusation. The room stilled again, not with shock, with recognition. Victoria's gaze held steady, but the space between her words stretched thinner now. "Because your condition is not affected by light exposure," she said, her tone precise, almost clinical. "That is not how your diagnosis works." Daniel nodded faintly, but not in agreement. "In consideration." "That is what I was told," he said. The distinction was quiet, but it shifted the weight of everything that followed. Amara remained where she was, her presence steady, her hands resting lightly against the mop handle, the faint scent of cleaning solution still grounding her in a space that no longer felt as rigid as it once had. She watched him, not with urgency, not with expectation, but with a calm understanding that this moment belonged to him now. The questions were no longer hers to carry. Daniel took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling, in a measured rhythm, then exhaled just as slowly, as if releasing something he had been holding for far too long. "What else was I told?" he said. It was not directed at anyone, but it filled the room. Victoria stepped forward again, her heels clicking softly, controlled, deliberate, her presence reasserting itself with careful precision. "You are letting doubt cloud your judgment," she said, her voice steady, persuasive, practiced. "This is exactly why we keep your environment stable. Too many external influences create confusion." The word confusion lingered, but it no longer defined the space. Daniel's head turned slightly, not toward her, but away, just enough to mark the separation. "No," he said quietly. "Clarity does." The sentence was simple, but it cut through everything that had been said before. Victoria's lips pressed together for a moment, then eased again, her composure rebuilding in layers. "Then let us get you somewhere private," she said, softer now, adjusting her approach. "We can review everything together. Calmly, properly." But Daniel did not move. He did not reach for her. He did not ask for guidance. Instead, he took another small step forward, fully into the light now, the warmth faint but present across his face and chest. His eyes remained unfocused, but something behind them had shifted, something that no longer accepted absence as truth. "No," he repeated. The word was not forceful. It was final. The room seemed to narrow again, not in tension, but in focus, as if everything unnecessary had been stripped away. The guard near the door looked toward Victoria, waiting for instruction, but none came. The nurse in the hallway had stopped pretending entirely, her attention fixed on the quiet center of the room, where something irreversible was unfolding. Daniel's hand lowered slowly to his side, his posture steady, grounded, no longer searching for direction. "I will speak to Dr. Hayes," he said. "Today." The words did not ask. They stated. Victoria's silence returned, but it was no longer strategic. It was constrained. For the first time, she did not have a response ready. And in that space, in that absence, something else became visible, not in what was said, but in what could no longer be controlled. Amara's gaze softened just slightly, not with relief, but with recognition. The moment had passed a threshold. There was no quiet way to return from it. And Daniel Whitmore, standing in the light he was never meant to notice, was no longer following the path laid out for him. He was beginning to choose his own. The word today did not fade when Daniel said it. It settled, firm and immovable, like something placed carefully that no one could push aside without consequence. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but in the way attention narrowed around him, around the quiet certainty in his voice. Daniel Whitmore stood fully within the light, no longer testing it, no longer questioning it, but existing in it as if it had always been there waiting for him to notice. His posture remained steady, shoulders relaxed but grounded, his hands resting at his sides, no longer searching, no longer unsure. Victoria did not move right away. Her stillness had changed again, no longer composed in control, but contained, as if every response now required calculation before it could be released. Her gaze remained fixed on him, sharp, precise, but something underneath it had shifted, something less certain than before. "That is not possible today," she said finally, her voice smooth, controlled, but quieter than it had been before. "Dr. Hayes is not available without notice. You know how these schedules work." The explanation was immediate, structured, logical. But this time, it did not redirect the moment. Daniel's head tilted slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition of the pattern. "Delay. Structure. Control. Then we will call him," he said calmly. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly at her side, the smallest movement, but enough to reveal the tension beneath her composed exterior. "That is not how this works," she replied, her tone firming again, attempting to re-establish authority. "There are protocols. You cannot simply demand." She stopped, but the word had already formed in the space between them. "Demand." Daniel's jaw set just slightly, not in anger, but in clarity. "I can," he said, with recognition. This was no longer about what he could see. It was about what he refused to ignore. Daniel reached slowly toward the chair beside him, his fingers brushing against the smooth leather, not to steady himself, but to locate something familiar. Then, deliberately, he turned slightly, aligning himself toward where he remembered Victoria standing. Not perfectly, not with sight, but with intention. "Call him," he said. The words were directed now. Clear. Specific. Victoria did not respond immediately. The silence stretched, thinner now, fragile at the edges. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the hallway, then back to him, as if measuring options, calculating outcomes that no longer aligned the way they once had. "Daniel," she said softly, her tone shifting again, gentler, almost pleading now. "You are making this harder than it needs to be. We can handle everything privately. There is no reason to involve." "Call him," Daniel repeated. This time, the interruption was immediate. Not louder, but final. The repetition did not escalate the moment. It closed it. Victoria's lips pressed together, then eased, her composure rebuilding again, layer by layer, but slower now, more deliberate. She reached into her bag with controlled precision, retrieving her phone, her movements measured, careful, as if each second bought her time to think. The soft tap of her fingers against the screen sounded louder than it should have in the quiet room. Daniel did not move while she dialed. He stood in the light, his face calm, his expression focused, his breathing steady. The faint warmth from the window still traced across his skin, a quiet reminder of something that had never been fully taken from him. Amara shifted her weight slightly, the subtle sound of her shoe against the tile grounding the moment again. She did not step forward. She did not speak. But she remained, and that presence mattered. Victoria lifted the phone to her ear, her posture straight, her expression composed once more, but the pause before she spoke was longer than before. "Dr. Hayes," she said finally, her voice smooth again, but tighter now. "This is Victoria Hale. We need to speak with you immediately." A beat, then another. Her gaze flickered briefly toward Daniel, then away. "Yes," she continued, her tone controlled, but no longer fully assured. "He is here. And he has questions." The word questions lingered, but it carried more weight than before. It was no longer something to be managed. It was something that had already begun to unravel everything around it. Daniel remained still, listening, not to her voice, but to the space between words, to the pauses that revealed more than answers ever could. And for the first time, the system built around him was no longer guiding the moment. It was reacting to it. The call did not end quickly, and that alone said more than anything Victoria had spoken before. She stood with the phone pressed to her ear, her posture still composed, but the silence on the other end stretched longer than expected, forcing her to wait instead of lead. Daniel Whitmore did not move. He remained in the light, steady, listening not to the words being exchanged, but to the pauses between them, the hesitation that no one could fully hide. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder now, filling the spaces where certainty used to live. "Yes," Victoria said after a moment, her voice measured, controlled, but thinner now. He is asking about his medication adjustments and the diagnostic notes. A pause. Her fingers tightened slightly around the phone. No, he is not confused, she added quickly, her tone sharpening just a fraction. He is observant. The word landed awkwardly, as if it did not belong in the version of events she had maintained for so long. Daniel's head tilted slightly at that, the faintest movement, but enough to show he had heard it. Observant. The label did not feel like an explanation. It felt like something closer to truth. Amara remained still, her presence quiet, her eyes steady, the scent of bleach still lingering faintly around her, grounding her in a moment that had grown far beyond anything she had intended. She watched Victoria, not with judgment, but with clarity, the kind that comes when something hidden begins to reveal itself without needing to be forced. Victoria turned slightly away from Daniel as she listened, her back straight, her expression carefully neutral, but her silence was no longer controlled. It was reactive. I understand, she said after another pause, her voice softer now, more careful. But he wants to speak with you directly. Another pause. Longer this time. Her jaw tightened just slightly. Now. The word was added with precision, but it did not carry the same authority it once did. Daniel's fingers lifted slightly again, resting just in front of him, not searching, not uncertain, but grounded, as if he no longer needed confirmation from the outside. The light still touched his face, steady and real, a quiet presence that had already changed everything. Victoria lowered the phone slowly, the motion controlled, deliberate, but the delay before she spoke was unmistakable. He will call you back, she said. The sentence was simple, but it did not close the moment. It left it open. Daniel nodded faintly, not in acceptance, but in acknowledgement, as if the response itself had been expected. Of course he will, he said quietly. The words were not sarcastic. They were certain. Victoria's gaze flickered toward him, sharp for just a second, then softened again, her composure returning in layers. Daniel, she began, her tone shifting once more, gentler now, more personal. You have to understand that these things are complex. There are details you may not. What medication was adjusted last week? He asked. The interruption was not forceful. It was precise. Victoria paused. The space between the question and her answer stretched longer than it should have. Your neural stabilizer, she said finally. The dosage was increased slightly to help with. Why? Daniel asked. Another pause. This one deeper. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around the phone again, though the call had already ended. Because your symptoms were not improving, she replied, her tone careful, controlled. That was the recommendation. Daniel's brow tightened just slightly, the faint crease returning, not from confusion, but from alignment, like pieces of something long scattered beginning to fall into place. Improving, he repeated quietly. The word lingered. He turned his face slightly again, toward the light, not searching, but grounding himself in something that did not change when explanations did. Then why did my sensitivity to light increase after that adjustment? He asked. The room stilled completely. Not even the hum of the lights seemed to carry the same weight now. Victoria did not answer immediately. Her silence stretched, fragile, exposed in a way that could no longer be hidden behind calm tone or practiced words. Amara's breath slowed, her chest rising and falling in quiet rhythm, her presence steady as the truth continued to unfold without needing to be forced. Daniel stood there, still, grounded, no longer reaching for answers that could be given to him, but asking questions that could only be faced. And in the space where Victoria's answer should have been, something else became clear. Not through words, but through the absence of them. The silence did not break. It deepened, stretching across the room like something fragile that no one dared to touch. Daniel Whitmore stood exactly where he had been, the light still resting across his face, steady and real, but now it felt different, not just something he sensed, but something he understood. His question remained unanswered, and in that absence, something far more powerful had taken its place. Victoria did not speak right away. Her composure held, but it was no longer effortless. It was maintained, constructed. Each second that passed without an answer made that effort more visible. Her fingers loosened slightly around the phone, then tightened again, as if her body had not yet decided how to respond to a moment she could no longer control. Because, she began, her voice calm but quieter now. The adjustment was meant to stimulate neural response. Increased sensitivity can happen. It is temporary. The explanation came, but it did not settle. It hovered, thin, incomplete. Daniel's head tilted slightly, not in confusion, but in evaluation. His fingers lifted again, resting near his chest, not searching, not uncertain, but grounded, as if he no longer needed to reach outward to confirm what he already felt. Then why was I told nothing would change? He asked. The question was not sharper. It was simpler, and that made it harder to avoid. Victoria's gaze flickered, just once, toward the floor, then back to him. Because expectations need to be managed, she replied, her tone smoothing again, but the delay had already left its mark. We did not want to give you false hope. False hope. The words lingered, but they no longer carried protection. They carried distance. Daniel turned his face slightly toward the light again, as if grounding himself in something that had not shifted, something that did not require explanation to be real. The faint warmth still brushed across his skin, steady, unchanged. Hope was not the problem, he said quietly. Information was. The sentence settled into the room, firm and undeniable. Amara's breath slowed slightly, her shoulders easing just a fraction, not in relief, but in recognition. The moment had crossed another threshold. The truth was no longer emerging. It was standing in full view. Victoria stepped forward, her heels making a soft sound against the tile, her presence reasserting itself again, but this time it felt different. Less commanding, more urgent. Daniel, listen to me, she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading beneath the control. Everything that has been done was for your stability, for your protection. Protection. The word hung there, but it felt heavier now, less certain. Daniel did not turn toward her. His posture remained steady, his attention anchored in the light, in the space that had revealed more truth than any explanation given to him before. Protection from what? He asked. The question did not rise. It did not demand, but it opened something that could not easily be closed again. Victoria's lips parted slightly, then pressed together again. The answer did not come immediately. The room felt smaller again, not physically, but in the way every sound seemed to narrow around the space between them. Amara remained still, her presence quiet, her eyes steady, her hands resting lightly against the mop handle, the faint scent of bleach still grounding her in a moment that had grown beyond anything she had intended. She watched Victoria now, not with expectation, but with clarity, the kind that does not need confirmation to recognize what is already there. From instability, Victoria said finally, her voice measured, but the certainty was thinner now. From unnecessary complications. The explanation came, but it no longer held. Daniel nodded faintly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, as if the answer itself had revealed more than it intended to hide. His fingers lowered slowly to his side, his posture steady, grounded, no longer searching for direction. And who decides what is necessary? He asked. This time, the question did not linger in the air. It settled directly between them. Victoria did not answer. Not immediately. And in that silence, something shifted again. Not in words, not in movement, but in the quiet realization that control, once unquestioned, had begun to fracture. Daniel Whitmore stood in the light that had always been there, no longer hidden from him, no longer explained away, and for the first time, the answers he had been given no longer defined his reality. The absence of truth had. The silence did not need to be filled anymore, because it had already answered what words could not. Daniel Whitmore stood in the light, steady and unmoving, but something inside him had shifted completely, not suddenly, not dramatically, but in a way that could not be reversed. The question he had asked still lingered in the air, simple and precise. And who decides what is necessary? Victoria did not respond. Her composure remained, but it was no longer seamless. It showed now, in the slight delay of her breath, in the stillness of her hands, in the space between her thoughts and her voice that no longer aligned perfectly. For the first time, control had not just slipped. It had been seen. Daniel lowered his chin slightly, not in defeat, not in uncertainty, but in understanding, as if something that had once been hidden behind layers of explanation had finally come into focus without needing sight. The light still rested across his face, soft and steady, no longer something he questioned, no longer something he needed to prove. It simply was. "You did," he said quietly. The words were not loud. They were not sharp. But they settled with a clarity that did not need emphasis. Victoria's breath caught, just slightly, the smallest fracture in a presence that had always appeared unshakable. "Daniel," she said, her voice softer now, no longer controlled in the same way. "Everything I have done has been for you." The sentence carried weight, but it no longer carried certainty. Daniel nodded faintly, not dismissing her, not rejecting her, but acknowledging something deeper than intention. "That is the problem," he replied. The words were calm, but they did not leave room for reinterpretation. The room remained still, not with tension now, but with something quieter, something closer to resolution. Amara stood a few feet away, her presence unchanged, her hands still resting lightly against the mop handle, the faint scent of bleach grounding her in a moment that had transformed without noise. She did not move forward. She did not speak. But she did not fade either. Daniel turned his face slightly, not toward Victoria, not toward the door, but toward the space where he remembered Amara standing. This time, the movement was not searching. It was intentional. The angle was not perfect, but it was closer than before. Close enough to matter. "Amara," he said. Her name landed gently, but it carried recognition. Amara straightened just slightly, her breath catching for a fraction of a second before settling. "Again." "Yes," she answered softly. Daniel paused, the space between them quiet but full, as if something important did not need to be rushed. The light shifted slightly as a cloud moved outside, softening for a moment, then returning, brushing faintly across both of them. "You did not heal my eyes," he said. The sentence could have been dismissal. It was not. It was understanding. Amara did not respond immediately. She held his words, not correcting them, not claiming more than what was true. "No," she said gently. "I did not." Another pause. Then Daniel's expression softened, just slightly, the tension easing from his brow, replaced by something quieter, something warmer. "You reminded me to look," he said. The words settled into the space between them, simple and complete. Victoria stood still, her presence no longer commanding the room, no longer shaping the moment. She was part of it now, not above it. And that shift, more than anything else, could not be undone. Daniel took a slow breath, the kind that fills the chest fully, then released it, steady and calm. His hand moved slightly, not searching for guidance, not reaching for control, but resting naturally at his side. "I will review everything," he said, his voice even, grounded. "And then I will decide what happens next." The sentence was not directed at anyone. It did not need to be. It belonged to him. The room began to move again, slowly, cautiously, as if returning to something familiar, but changed. The guard shifted toward the door. The nurse in the hallway finally stepped away. The hum of the lights returned to being just a sound, not a presence. Amara took a small step back, not retreating, but giving space, her role complete in a way that did not need acknowledgement. Daniel remained where he was for a moment longer, standing in the light, feeling it, understanding it, no longer something taken from him, but something that had always been there waiting to be recognized. He turned slightly then, not perfectly, but with intention, his direction his own. And in that quiet movement, something settled, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a warmth that did not need to be explained. He had not been healed by power, or by control, or by the systems built around him. He had been changed by something far quieter, something no one had thought to measure, and that was enough.